Okay, let's dive into this. When you hear the name Isaac Newton, I bet a very specific, kind of cartoonish image pops into your head right away. You know the one. A quiet, distinguished gentleman sitting peacefully under a tree, an apple falls on his head, and boom, he suddenly discovers gravity. It's a really neat, sanitized story. But as we'll see in this explainer, that myth barely scratches the surface of the man's highly complex, dark, and honestly, wonderfully eccentric reality. Today, we're going to look at the actual historical records, his secret manuscripts, and his bitter public feuds to uncover a Newton you probably never knew existed.
We've got a truly wild journey ahead of us. We'll be looking at the pioneer of physics, the Great Calculus War, Newton the secret alchemist, his time as master of the mint, and finally, the complex genius himself.
Part 1. The Pioneer of Physics, Mathematical Perfection. Let's start by grounding ourselves in his absolutely undeniable, undisputed genius. This geometric diagram straight from Book 1, Section 1 of his 1687 masterpiece, the Principia, brilliantly illustrates his pristine logic. Using these inscribed and circumscribed parallelograms, Newton is demonstrating his method of first and last ratios. He's proving that as you diminish the breadth of these shapes to infinity, the figures ultimately converge and become equal to the curvilinear figure. It is pure, flawless rational deduction. There are no wild hypotheses here, just strict mathematical proof. I want you to keep this pristine, highly structured logic in mind because it sets up a massive contrast for what we're going to see later.
Beyond the Principia, Newton completely revolutionized how we understand light with his 1704 book, Optics. This was a massive deal because, unlike the Latin Principia, he actually wrote optics in accessible English, making it a true model of popular science. Through his incredibly careful experiments with prisms, he completely overturned the long-standing dogma of Aristotle, who had believed pure light was fundamentally white or colorless. Newton proved the exact opposite, that white light is actually a mixture of 7 spectral hues. But what's really fascinating is how he ended the book. He dropped a planned final section and instead finished with a series of queries. These were rhetorical questions that went way beyond optics, hinting at some unproven obsessions about heat, gravity, and the very nature of matter. These queries were our first real public clue that Newton's mind was wandering into some pretty mysterious territories.
Moving to Part 2, the Great Calculus War, or the Golden Age of Mudslinging. Pivoting sharply from that pristine science, just look at the profound difference in how two distinct geniuses express the exact same mathematical revolution. On the left, we have Newton's fluxional notation, represented by a y with a dot over it, and on the right, we have the German mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz's differential notation, using dy dx and that elongated s for integrals, which, by the way, is the exact notation we still use today. Now, both of these men had created differential and integral calculus entirely independently, but the question of who did it first sparked what is arguably one of the most bitter, vindictive priority disputes in the entire history of science. Following the timeline of how this feud exploded, Newton actually began his work on fluxions way back in 1666, but he kept it to himself and didn't formally publish it. Leibniz, meanwhile, started his work around 1674 and famously published his method first in 1684. Fast forward to 1699, and Newton's supporters start publicly accusing Leibniz of plagiarism. But right here is where Newton's pristine, hyper-rational public image completely fractures. In 1712, the Royal Society published a definitive report concluding that Newton was the true first inventor. The catch? Newton was the actual president of the Royal Society at the time. He secretly orchestrated and literally wrote the highly biased report himself, all to destroy Leibniz's reputation. He wasn't just a quiet scholar in a room, he was a fierce, relentless rival who was not afraid to fight dirty to protect his legacy.
So we have the brilliant mathematician and we have the ruthless rival, but what about his private life? This brings us to a question that kind of mirrors one of Newton's own famous queries. Was the founder of classical physics a secret alchemist? Well, in 1936, the scholarly world got a pretty massive shock. The auction house Sotheby's released a catalog of 329 lots of Newton's hidden, handwritten manuscripts. When he died in 1727, these papers had been completely sealed away, literally labeled not fit to be printed. And when they were finally revealed to the public, over a third of them were filled with undeniable, hardcore alchemy.
Part 3. Newton, the Secret Alchemist, and the Search for the Green Lion. Peeling back the curtain on those laboratory notebooks, the crucial point we need to understand is that we absolutely shouldn't view his alchemy just as sheer madness. Back in the 17th century, the broader term used was chemistry, and it was a massive, heavily multifaceted scientific domain.
It basically had three main branches. First, you had commercial technology, making things like pigments, dyes, and mineral acids. Second was iatrochemistry, which was basically the cutting edge of mineral-based medicine. And third was chrysopoeia, the attempt to transmute base metals into gold. Newton was heavily involved in all three. To really understand him, we have to legitimize this pursuit. His chemical technology was deeply connected to his other scientific endeavors, even if his quest for transmuting metals seems totally mystical to us today.
But you look at the actual pages of his lab notebooks, and things get incredibly bizarre. Sitting right alongside his sober explanations of optical phenomena like freezing and boiling, Newton wrote down recipes filled with this deeply coded esoteric language. He lists ingredients like Neptune's trident, Mercury's caducean rod, and famously, the green lion. He was completely captivated by the graphic, mysterious imagery of alchemy. We're talking poisonous dragons and dying toads. The very founder of modern physics was actively pursuing the ancient dream of transmuting metals, intentionally writing in secret codes to protect what he truly believed might be divine, transmutational secrets.
Part 4. Master of the Mint, the Relentless Detective. Now, Newton didn't spend his entire life locked away in a Cambridge study. In his later years, his obsessive precision actually found a highly practical and honestly very unexpected home in economics and criminal justice. In 1696, he moved to the Tower of London to take up public office as the Warden of the Royal Mint, and by 1699 he was promoted to Master of the Mint. He managed to survive the immense political upheavals of the era and held on to this incredibly powerful position for 30 years until his death. He fundamentally managed the nation's currency, culminating in his famous 1717 report that paved the exact way for reducing the value of the gold guinea to 21 shillings.
And he absolutely was not just some figurehead pushing papers. Newton brought his intense laboratory exactness straight into the real world. He supervised incredibly precise experiments on the purity of copper, but even more fascinating than that, he became a relentless, hands-on detective. He personally conducted interviews with criminals and informers. He hunted down counterfeiters and clippers, the people who are literally shaving edges off coins and destroying the nation's silver currency. At a time when corruption was absolutely everywhere, Newton set an unprecedented standard for integrity. He famously refused a massive bribe of over 6,000 pounds related to copper coinage contracts. He was just an entirely uncompromising enforcer of the law.
Finally, Part 5. The Complex Genius, Shattering the Caricature.
It is definitely time to shatter that old caricature of the quiet man under the apple tree. The reality of Isaac Newton is that he was a brilliant, esoteric, and fiercely competitive human being. We can't separate the pristine, flawless logic of his mathematics from his mystical, heavily coded search for the green lion in his secret alchemy lab. We can't separate his revolutionary discoveries in physics from the ruthless, vindictive ways he destroyed his intellectual rivals like Leibniz. And we certainly can't separate the absent-minded professor from the relentless detective interrogating counterfeiters in the Tower of London. They are all the exact same man.
So I want to leave you with a final thought today, really in the spirit of Newton's own queries. How should we balance a historical figure's pristine, world-changing scientific contributions with their deeply flawed, wonderfully eccentric, and sometimes super vindictive human reality? Does knowing about his secret alchemy and his bitter feuds somehow diminish his genius? Or does it actually make his leaps of logic even more incredible because they came from such a wonderfully complicated mind? Definitely think on that the next time someone tells you the simple story of the falling apple. Thanks so much for exploring this amazing reality with me, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.